Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a special edition of the Mr. Warren Hayes Show. I, of course, am Mr. Warren Hayes, and yes, it is a special day because we're popping out here on a Friday, which we usually don't necessarily do, but extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures, and I have an extraordinary topic regarding pro wrestling to go over with you today on youtube.com/MrWarrenHayes or on your favorite podcast feed. Thank you very much for listening wherever you are right now. But I have decided today that we are going to talk about a topic that's been going around some wrestling criticism circles, up and down and all around, and that's the one regarding the Jericho Vortex, as it's been dubbed. This idea that Chris Jericho, whenever someone gets involved in a feud with Chris Jericho in AEW, he gets sucked in, ergo a vortex, where the person doesn't really quite get out of it unscathed. That's that's pretty much it. I'm sure if you consume other wrestling media out there, I don't know why you would outside of me, but if you do, you've probably heard the term, or at least the idea being thrown around. And I decided to break that down, have a bit of an exercise, and see how real this is. And for the occasion, I invited Joe Lanza of the Flagship podcast to join me in this exercise and give his own views. So we have a bit of a back and forth here. We chatted about this for over an hour, and it's a very, very interesting exercise that we did here. So I hope you all enjoy it. Thank you very much for being here. Like, subscribe, reviews, ratings, all that stuff helps out. But let's get right to it. The Jericho Vortex, featuring myself and Joe Lanza of the Flagship podcast. Enjoy. So everyone, as mentioned, I am joined right now by the co-host of the Flagship podcast. Joe Lanza is with me today on the Mr. Warren Hayes Show. How you doing, Joe?
Oh, I'm just fantastic. I'm just going to pretend that we didn't talk for 10 minutes and that we're being acquainted right at this moment. So how are you, sir?
I'm very well. Thank you very much. Yeah. It's not as if, I like the idea of just, outright breaking kayfabe. It's like, there's, our relationship is not, entirely based on the moment that we hit record. Right. So we've established this straight off the bat. That's good.
It immediately makes things comfortable. And all I'll say is we were talking about clubbing seals before we went on the air, and I'm just going to let that hang so that you get canceled. How about that?
There you go. My brand is completely demolished.
Yeah.
Of course, Joe, as I mentioned, is the co-host of the Flagship podcast, which records live every Thursday. Well, why don't you do the little plug then? Why don't we start off with that? Because you record live for patrons, but then it's available elsewhere. But I'll let you sell your stuff.
Oh, we're doing plugs at the top. I like that because
Sure.
You know why? I think you're a genius. And I'm going to tell you why I think you're a genius. Because everybody puts the plugs at the end of the show, but everybody's Xing out by then. They're like, oh, the content's over. Here comes the spiel.
Exactly.
No one listens to it.
The minute you say, plug your stuff, stop. That's it.
No one cares.
No, exactly.
No one cares.
No.
They're out. All right. So you do the plugs at the top. It forces these people to listen to the plugs.
There you go.
So I have to say, you are a broadcasting genius, which is even more reason to quit that shoot job we were talking about off the air. Okay,
we covered a lot of topics off the air. We really did.
That's right. So the Flagship podcast is live usually on Thursdays behind our paywall at Patreon. That is the unedited, unfiltered version where you hear about, clubbing seals and quitting jobs. And then the edited version comes out generally the next day. If we do the live show on a Thursday, it hits all of your podcast feeds, wherever you listen to your podcasts, hopefully not Apple, on Fridays. So, and that's because we have an ongoing feud with Apple.
I was going to ask, what's the issue? What's the deal with Apple? I'm not aware of this.
We don't have time for this. The point is they're a terrible podcatcher in our view. Okay. I'll just leave it at that. It has nothing to do with the Apple Corporation or anything like that. But we've had a lot of listeners that have had trouble with Apple. That's all. But anyway, if you're an Apple podcast user, I don't mean to insult you, but anyway, you can catch the Flagship on any of your podcast catchers of choice. And generally on Friday mornings, we do a ridiculous 3+ hour show that covers the entire gamut, the entire world of wrestling, what's going on that week in wrestling. And, it's not just going to be WWE and AEW talk. We attempt to cover the entire world of wrestling. I do believe, as Jim Ross would say, watching a standard tournament, that it is a unique format and that people should give it a try.
It's one of the few podcasts that's in my personal rotation because look, if you like listening to a podcast that talks about pro wrestling and the things that implicate professional wrestling and that are important to the pro wrestling as a whole, I don't think there's anywhere better really to get that kind of talk, because look, I don't have anything against fan podcasts, so on and so forth. That's absolutely fine, but sometimes you just want to get to some nitty gritty. You want to get some analysis. You want to hear what's going on elsewhere, and you want to talk about the in ring, the wrestling itself. You guys cover it all, and you and Rich, and I think you guys do a fantastic job. It's always one that I look forward to.
Well, thank you very much. After 11 years, hopefully we're pretty decent at it, and I appreciate the kind words.
So today, Joe came on the show today because I pitched him an idea. I said, "Look, why don't we talk about this? Look, because it's something that's been out there in the wrestling community. This thing that we call that's been dubbed anyway, the Jericho Vortex, right? And just for some context here, according to some fans, pundits, analysts, the Jericho Vortex is like this idea that Jericho sucks individuals into feuds with him, right, for extended periods of time, which result in the said wrestlers having their momentum killed, generally for two reasons. These are the two top reasons that Jericho gets criticized for, because first of all, the feuds are a little too long in the tooth, and Jericho always seems to find a way to get the better end of the deal once the feud is over. So that's essentially what would you agree with that statement, Joe, that this is pretty much what the Jericho Vortex seems to mean to people?
I would say that you're giving a pretty accurate description of what people are talking about when they talk about what the Jericho Vortex is. Yeah.
Okay. So we're on the same wavelength. So what I decided to throw, what Joe and I are going to be doing today is we're going to look back at some of Chris Jericho's feuds, and we're going to draw a line in the middle, right in the sand. We're going to say if that wrestler who feuded with Chris Jericho is better off now, better off because of feuding, or better off now, or worse off. Just as simple as that. Now, in the interest of fairness as well, we could also say, Joe, that it's going to be hard to tell, as a get out of jail free card, if we feel that the waters are a little too muddied to take a strong stance, which is acceptable. And for the purposes of this discussion as well, I'm just going to lay out some ground rules here. Here's how I determined what a feud is or not. First and foremost, length, right? We need weeks or months of angles, stories to get to a big match. It has to have more than just a couple of weeks of build to the blow off. So we're leaving behind things or feuds like with Jack Perry, right? Like the 10-minute draw thing, Scorpio Sky, Frankie Kazarian, Pineapple Pete, Suge D, right? That kind of stuff. And also something that weighs heavily into considering whether it was a feud or not is if there was a pay-per-view match involved. So, I think the list is pretty accurate. Might not be perfect. Maybe, someone afterwards will be like, hey, you forgot this glaring omission, but I think we got everyone. Joe, you saw the list. It feels pretty complete, right? I think.
Yeah. I think you did a good job drawing a line there. I will say, with some of the shorter term programs he had that you might not be considering a longer term feud. When you look at some of those, you look at Jack Perry, the Jungle Boy thing, where they did the 10-minute challenge on TV or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And technically, I believe the result of that was a draw.
Yep.
If we were to include that, I would certainly say that Jungle Boy came out of that on the better end. I mean, at that stage of his career, he had not yet gotten. It was at the beginning stages of the Rocket Pack push that he was going to get, and he went toe to toe with the biggest star in the company for 10 minutes, and that was certainly a good little gimmick to help get Jungle Boy over. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And, even at the time, the whole thing is that he hadn't even won a match in AEW at that point, right?
Yeah.
He was on a losing streak. So that was the whole thing going in here. Yeah, that's the one where, when I was setting up my criteria, where I was like, this is kind of the rougher one to set aside because it was a kickoff point for him. I completely agree. So I'm glad you brought it up. I think it does, as an honorable mention, I guess we could toss it in there because absolutely that, like you said, it was the start of the Rocket Pack. He absolutely kicked off from that point, and it was he's absolutely better off having had that moment to shine because it was a very good match, and in my memory, audience was really hot for it too.
Yeah. Now, Frankie Kazarian, I'll be completely honest, I don't even remember that. Scorpio Sky, now, Jericho set that up by marching around backstage, and Sky just happened to be standing there, and he threw an insult at him. I forget what it was. And that was they basically planted a seed for a future match with that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another one where I agree with you that I wouldn't call it a full-blown long-term feud or anything like that. But I think at the end of the day, Jericho working that little mini program with Scorpio Sky certainly helped Sky from a singles perspective and his career in AEW. And the Pineapple Pete thing, I mean, that was just a little 1 week to the next television program with a job guy. That was just something to entertain people, for a week or whatever. There was no intent to get Pineapple Pete over as anything more than, kind of a 1 week gimmick to get the fans to rally around the jobber to beat the nefarious heel. So There's really not even much to dig into with that one. So I think you did a good job parsing those out.
Okay. Thank you. I'll have you more often because, I think no other guest has given me so much praise so far on everything, on the work I put in. So I appreciate it.
Once again, quit the job.
And just to set the record straight, the job has nothing to do with clubbing seals. Just in case people are starting to try and maybe put two and two together, just so you know. Let's go right in. Start off with the list we're going to go chronologically here. So from an inaugural point, we should start with Adam Page, right? It was for the inaugural AEW World Championship. That was going to be put up at All Out 2019. This was one where, on one hand, I did consider parsing it out, but then I'm like, look, this is like the first big AEW feud, too significant in the history of the company. And there was some build to this, right? They both won contenders matches at Double or Nothing in May 2019. And let's not forget that there was no weekly TV at the time. Page won the Casino Battle Royale, and Jericho defeated Kenny Omega. And then the story had a bump at Fight for the Fallen, or at least an angle, where Jericho attacked Page after a match with Kip Sabian. He was the Dark Order were doing the thing with the with the goons all dressed alike. He was dressed up as one of them. And, so there was build, a little bit of it, but, it's really AEW's first big feud. So how do you feel about Adam Page after his feud with Chris Jericho? Is he better off or worse off?
Okay, so at the time, at least in some of my circles, the big debate was who should be the first champion of this company. Mm-hmm. Should it be Chris Jericho, and the other choice among fans seemed to be Kenny Omega. Who are they going to put this title on? And I was firmly in the Chris Jericho camp because he was at that point the biggest star in the company. I think that would be hard to argue with, especially since Mox hadn't really gotten there yet.
Yep.
And he would be the perfect person to establish as the champion, and then you could have the baby faces chase him. So what they did here, I thought, was a clever piece of booking. They had him defeat Hangman Page, who obviously the long-term story with Hangman Page is we're going to build this guy to be our future babyface ace. And we're going to establish him right off the bat as someone who can be in that world title mix. So from that standpoint, I think that this program worked in terms of everything the company wanted to accomplish. Get their biggest star on top with the title and establish that Hangman Page at some point is going to be a real player in this promotion. In fact, he nearly won the title here in kayfabe. So I don't know. I mean, Jericho may have ultimately, won the feud and won the match and won the title, but he should have. I mean, that was the right call. And I think that it helped establish the path that they put Hangman Page on moving forward. So I have to chalk this one up as, by the parameters of your rules here, as a program that helped Hangman Page.
I agree, and I was also very pro Jericho because if only because you want to start off your title, give it some prestige, give it some attention, because there was, like you said, there was no one on that roster at that point that had the star power that Jericho had. So it all made sense. And listen, I mean, it would be really interesting to really trace back, because the entire history of Hangman Page from that point on in the company, right? Because everyone, always points back to the frictions with the Elite and Kenny Omega as this long-term storytelling, but there are a lot of seeds that were set there as well, this long path to winning the championship, the world title from Kenny Omega, really started with Jericho because Page at that point he can't win the big one, right? That was his thing. He just can't win the big one. So when you especially take a step back to look at, like you said, the path that was set up for him, it makes complete sense. And he's one of the most over acts in the company. He's one of the top baby faces in the company. And I personally wouldn't change a thing. I think I think he's really, really better off having feuded with Jericho at that point.
Yeah, it set the table for everything that was to come and is actually still happening in 2023.
All right. Let's move on then. This is going to be an interesting one because Jericho's next feud was with Cody Rhodes in 2019. Cody became the number one contender for the title, and Rhodes earned a shot at the AEW World Title at Full Gear 2019. And this is the feud, right, where Cody said he would never challenge for the AEW World Title ever again. Of course, lost the match. We know we're all fully aware of Cody's path since then. It's interesting to think of where he is now in WWE right now. Is he better off having had this feud with Chris Jericho or not?
Well, this is an interesting one because I would say no, and that was a poor decision to have him not be able to challenge for the title again. But the thing about this one is, I don't know how you can blame Jericho for this. Cody did it to himself.
Yeah, exactly.
Like this was a Cody decision. Like, this was not Jericho marching into to Tony Khan's office, demanding that the finish be changed, and that Cody could no longer challenge for the title. This was a Cody idea. So this is kind of a weird one. Jericho wins the match and I guess in effect wins the feud, but this was something that Cody booked for himself. Mm-hmm. So it's really hard to blame this quote unquote Jericho Vortex for taking down Cody. And, the stipulation ultimately may have played a part in, sort of, if you would want to term it, Cody's downfall in the company, or Cody ultimately deciding to leave the company. But I think it's nearly impossible to pin this one on Jericho.
And I'm with you, and I think, having listened to the Flagship quite a bit, you and I are in complete agreement that Cody's the distaste that people created regarding Cody and the stuff that they'd say about him was, in a lot of circumstances, completely unwarranted. This idea that Cody would, only think about himself, and that the feuds were only about himself when he was a guy that was putting guys over right and left. That it's a whole, So I think he did a lot of good for a lot of people losing this match, moving forward. The TNT title, I think is, that was, it was exciting and good out the gate because he was the champion and he made it feel important. I would even go as far as to say, Joe, that this feud actually, it's paying off for him today in WWE, because what is his story right now in WWE, right? It's like, I'm going to be the world champion here. I'm going to get the title that my dad never got. I couldn't be world champion in the other place. Like, he's never said that explicitly, right? He's never said I could not be world champion in AEW. We all know it's kayfabe, right? That's fine. But, even today, like even in WWE right now, he's still, this is still the story. And I think it takes root in this idea where in AEW, he couldn't be world champion. And now in his new company with his new employers, he's going to be world champion.
If you really want to play conspiracy theorist, I've put forth this theory on my own show that is it possible that Cody, with this stipulation, was playing a little long-term 4D chess in that, he can make himself a martyr in this place, knowing that eventually he was going to go back to WWE and set himself up for the storyline that he's doing now.
Wow.
And it sounds preposterous on the surface.
And yet,
if you, yet look how it's playing out. And if you know how Cody thinks, it's not something that would be completely outlandish that he would never, like if I told you that Jon Moxley came up with that sort of scheme, you'd be like, there's not a chance. Jon Moxley does not think about wrestling in that way. He just wants to go out there and bleed at the first opportunity he has. And, Cody, it's totally plausible that he would come up or concoct this kind of long-term scheme, So it's just something for people to think about. I'm not saying it's true. I'm not saying I know anything. It's just something interesting to think about.
I mean, it's plausible because that's kind of how his brain works, right?
Yes.
That's how he thinks about the business and his career path. So yeah, that's not implausible. So what do you say? Do you think he's better off after the feud or worse off?
No, I think, okay, so again, this is a tricky one. In AEW, he was clearly not better off for doing this stip and losing the match. But again, I have to put a disclaimer on. Like, I have a hard time blaming Chris Jericho for that, though.
Sure.
This was Cody's idea, and if it did in fact hurt him in the company, he did it to himself. I will say this: the two guys in AEW history who have sort of had this fan reputation for, eating people up in feuds or not doing right by talent have been Cody and Jericho. And I think that's so preposterous. I mean, obviously we're doing a whole show on whether or not Jericho does this. But in Cody's case, I can't think of anybody in the company who put over more, whether you want to call it young talent or talent on the rise or people who needed the rub than Cody did. I mean, this isn't a Cody show, but I can list off the top of my head, probably close to 8 to 12 wrestlers who Cody helped put over or flat out did put over and lost to him clean in the middle center of the ring and
got signed and got them signed too.
And got them signed. And, whether, Ricky Starks is a great example of that. And, even crossing over to like the women's division where he put over Jade Cargill in her first match, it's like, there's just a laundry list of people. MJF he came out on the wrong end of that one.
True.
In a very important part of MJF's career, and was the catalyst for the big MJF push. And I can go on and on. Again, this isn't the Cody show, but very selfless. And I think that as we go through this show, we will see that Jericho has been very similar in that way. Because like you, I am not a proponent of this Jericho Vortex theory. I think it's a load of shit. And as we move along, I'll explain why. Hey, can I work blue here?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Yeah. I should have asked that before we went on the air, but
yeah,
now
we were so busy talking about other stuff. we forgot to lay down the basics.
Yeah. But now you've unleashed me because, my mouth. But no, I think it's a load of shit. I mean, and I think as we go through this exercise, we'll see why I believe that's a load of shit. I mean, I've said it many times on my show. If I'm a young wrestler in that company, AEW, I am begging to work with Chris Jericho because you're going to get so much benefit from this. If he likes you and he wants to put you over and wants to work with you, he's going to put you over in the end. And we'll demonstrate that as we move along. Number two, and this is a big thing in AEW, because we all know Tony Khan likes to cycle the talent in and out. Guys will disappear for weeks, if not months on end. If you work with Chris Jericho, you're on TV every week because Chris Jericho is on TV every week. Say what you want about Chris Jericho. Guy's 53 years old or whatever it is. You can never question his work ethic. The guy never takes a break, and he's always on the show. And if you're in a program with Chris Jericho, you're going to get more airtime in this company than you've probably ever gotten before. And that's another advantage of working with him. And again, most of the time, he puts you over in the end. Despite this weird reputation that he sucks you into this vortex where it's bad for you. If I'm a young wrestler and I just watched this Ricky Starks feud, or I've been watching Jericho's career here, they should be lined up around the block to work with Chris Jericho. And you're working with a legend. And he's probably going to put you over. I mean, what happens after that is up to you. And what you do with that and whether you can get over with the fans. But, so just to be clear, I'm on your side of this as we go into this. And maybe by the end of the exercise, maybe it'll change one of our minds. Who knows? But the way I see it, Jericho has been incredibly selfless in this company. And I'll even go a step further. I believe in the 4-year history of AEW, you could argue he's the MVP of the company. I mean, it's either him or Moxley. It's one or the other.
I was going to say, it's either him or Mox, yeah.
And personally, I'd go with Jericho because, again, he was there from day one. He was the first champion, which was a very important role. And as we will demonstrate as we go through this, and again, as I said, he's on TV every week. He still pops quarter hours 4 years later, 53 years old. He has good matches for the most part. He had that 1 year where he got out of shape and he was terrible. But outside of that 1 year where he got out of shape and he was terrible and he got himself back into shape, he generally has good matches. He's over as fuck. The whole Judas thing is going to be one of the sort of tentpole things that people associate with AEW, people singing that theme song, the party atmosphere and all of that. And again, he just puts people over and helps people get over left and right. I think he's the MVP of the company to this point.
I think, like, I mean, you brought it up, right? Like that stretch where he was, like you said, he was out of shape. I think this is something that we've forgotten because, sometimes wrestling moves so fast that you just have to make space, for what's happening really quickly. So, you have a tendency maybe to leave some things behind, but, people were outright saying this guy's washed. He's done. He's finished. That one whiffed lion salt. I don't know if you remember that spot. I don't remember.
Yeah.
People were just like, no, he's done. Let's get this guy off my TV. What does he go do, Joe? He hits the gym. He gets back into shape. I don't know who he was training with at that point, but he comes back and he's been just stellar since, like irreproachable, really.
Yeah. And I mean, he knew it. He knew his body had gotten out of control. He knew his performances were bad. And we may even talk about some of those as we move along. And he straightened. And I was one of those people saying, this is it. He's done. Let's down cycle this guy and slowly work him out. But he totally made a huge comeback. And once again, I don't think he should ever be your world champion again, but for the 4-year history of this company, I personally would argue that he's the MVP of the company, which runs completely counter to this weird narrative that of what we're discussing here today, which is this Jericho Vortex.
I agree. And just to be clear, like to close out the Cody thing, I think Cody was, I think he, you say he maybe he wasn't beneficial. Maybe he was a little worse off. I think he was better off doing exactly what he did. I think he established so many great things, including the TV title. And I think he's still benefiting from that today. Conspiracy or not, I think that's
a good point with the TNT title, because by not being able to challenge for the world title, it really made that title feel more important when Cody had it.
That was brilliant, actually.
Yeah, those were great runs with that title. That title has had some good champions since, but I think it really peaked right there with Cody. So yeah, you can make the argument that Cody came out of this for the best. Sure. All right. Well, we'll disagree on that. We'll fist fight later. That's all.
Exactly. Jon Moxley is the next feud that's up in 2020. This was Jericho's second big championship feud. Like he had a couple of defenses in there, like we mentioned previously, Scorpio Sky and Jack Perry. But this is the one that would lead into Revolution 2020, which also included the weigh-in, right? Where Jericho bled and finished with a big beatdown brawl. And Moxley would end up winning the title in this one. So, what do we feel about Jon Moxley? How did he come out of this feud? I think this is a pretty easy one, right?
Yeah, no sane person can argue this one. He put the guy over in the end and lost his title to him. What more do you want?
There you go. And I mean, it was the right move. It was the good guy to put the title on at the same time. And Moxley's one of the top guys in the company still to this day. So I don't know what else we could say, really.
Yeah, this one's a slam dunk.
There you go.
And there's a couple that are in both directions, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. I think here, this is another pretty easy one. Where I'm sort of lumping in the Jericho Appreciation Society here in their feud with the Elite, which also included Matt Hardy at that point. Mainly focusing around the Stadium Stampede era at Double or Nothing 2020, right? So we're in the pandemic, we're in the midst of it. We're trying to do all sorts of creative stuff. So there's a lot of crossover with a lot of people in here. We've got Hangman Page back in the mix, but it's not necessarily a Jericho feud per se. Omega, the Bucks. I don't know exactly how you want to tackle this. We can tackle this as an entity, as a group, or if you want to, specifically point out people here. But this was a substantial feud nonetheless.
Yeah, I think you meant Inner Circle. You may have
did
said
I say? Yes, I did mean Inner Circle. Apologies. Yes,
they're basically derivatives of the same, unit anyway.
Yes.
So I could see where that'd be a little confusing. But
we'll fix it in post.
I mean, you look at it, and what was the end result? Like the Stadium Stampede match was the blow-off, right?
Right. Yeah.
And who won? Well, the Elite won. So, and at the end of the day, Jericho loses another feud. But really, with this one, the Elite were already established as huge stars and top guys, and I don't know if they came out of this stronger with a ton of momentum, but it certainly didn't hurt them. And it was just no, not at all. And it was just a feud among a bunch of top guys.
Yeah.
So for the purposes of our exercise, is this any kind of evidence of the vortex of Jericho? Of course not. Can't be.
No, I don't think so either. And, and they were, for what it was worth at the time, with the, with no crowds and so on and so forth, they were doing everything they could to just like keep things fresh and try out some stuff, maybe the Stadium Stampede wasn't for everyone, but at the time it did entertain quite a bit because I mean, we don't need to hash back how difficult it was to watch pro wrestling without any live crowds. So, they really did their best here. And I think it's au contraire. It's a testament that, the Elite, everyone came out of here undamaged to a degree, right? Because it could have sunk them. It was a situation that could have absolutely gone a different way. If they decide to get too creative, too cute, yeah. It just could have sunk them completely. So no, I think everyone came out at the very least undamaged out of this one.
Agree.
Next feud that we have on the docket here is Orange Cassidy. Now, I think this is probably maybe the first Vortex feud, because it's a very long Jericho singles feud, and this is one of the precepts of the Vortex for those who adhere to the to the dogma. We notably here had Jericho beating Orange Cassidy in July at Fyter Fest Night 2. We must not forget the debate, which was moderated by Eric Bischoff at the time.
Excuse me, sir. We must forget the debate. It's I completely disagree with you. We must forget the debate.
Then there was the $7,000 match, for reparations to the jacket that Orange Cassidy had sprayed in oranges, or the oranges had fallen from the rafters. Cassidy won that match, by the way, and it all came to an end with the Mimosa match at All Out 2020 in September, where Cassidy beat Jericho again. Look, I'm not going to hide it. I'm going to come straight out the gate. I think Orange Cassidy was better off after this feud. I don't think, if anything, this helped raise his profile significantly as opposed to what it was. And I think he still carries that today. I think it's still on the same type of momentum. He's not one of the top 3 guys in the company, as far as, in the lane that he's in right now on the at the top of the card. He's not main eventing, but he's one of the most over acts in AEW, period. Right now, he's on a workhorse tear. I don't think this hurt him in any way, shape, or form. What do you think, Joe?
Inarguable. This was an incredible boon to Orange Cassidy's career. It was his first major feud with a major star, and he won decisively. Mm-hmm. Jericho wins the first match. A little bit of heat. Something called heat, right? Mm-hmm. And then Cassidy wins the next 2 matches, both of them of which were stipulation matches. And he wins the blow-off in the Mimosa match, which I voted my worst match of 2020.
It wasn't good.
I hated this feud with a passion. I hated the Mimosa match. I hated everything about this. But that doesn't matter for the purposes of this exercise. Did Orange Cassidy come out better on the other end? Of course he did. Mm-hmm. And this was an example of Chris Jericho picking somebody to put over, which isn't going to be the only example of that, by the way, as we go through this exercise, but one of the more prominent examples of picking someone to put over and then putting them over. Mm-hmm. And for this alleged mastermind who's always out for himself, he sure seems to do that a lot. And this was a shining example of that. And now with Orange Cassidy, we have a guy who is one of their more reliable television draws and almost always does very well in his quarter hours, is over like crazy in every building that they're in. Okay. He's not one of their tippy top, top stars or anything like that, but he is a solid mid-card television draw who's over like crazy in the buildings. And this feud was certainly, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Chris Jericho made him with this feud, but it certainly was part of what helped make Orange Cassidy into what he is in this company now. I mean, this one, I think, again, is another slam dunk. It's inarguable. I guess the only angle you could possibly take would be if you really hated this stuff, the Mimosa match, the debate, the silliness of it, the way that I did, you could argue that this was all a massive turnoff. But I still think you'd have trouble constructing a cohesive argument that any of this hurt Orange Cassidy. I don't know how you could possibly work your way there, even if you didn't like sort of the silliness of the feud.
Yeah, the sports entertaining part of it. Because again, look, we're dead smack in the pandemic, man. They're trying their best. They have talent. They have the curtain jerkers at ringside, to clap along and make some crowd noise. Like they're doing whatever they can to just like, make the show to not let the show feel dry.
No pun intended.
No pun intended. So yeah, no, the Mimosa match was terrible, and I wasn't a big fan of the feud itself, but I mean it's irrefutable at this point, and to this day, Cassidy is on TV every week. If he's not on Dynamite, he's on Rampage. He works every week on television.
I gotta tell you, he'd be, if they lost him, I think it'd be a major loss.
I agree. I think so.
I mean, he is perfect for the role that he's in. And, I don't want to repeat all my same points, but he's over. He's a key part of that roster, particularly for their television. Now, they haven't relied on him yet to like pop a pay-per-view number, right? Like that. He's not that kind of star.
No.
But he is such an important backbone piece to their television as such an important television presence. Look, maybe some of your listeners don't pay attention to this kind of stuff, but I implore them to check out, the quarter hour ratings. And this guy is money every time. And they put him in the key spots. He either opens the show, works top of the hour, or works the main event. And those are the three key points in the television. And he's always positioned, or is usually positioned in one of them. And even when he isn't, when he's given a traditionally harder quarter hour to perform in, right? And I don't want to get too in the weeds with television ratings and things that.
Let's weed it out. That's fine.
He'll generally outperform those quarters when he's in them. When he's stuck when he's, put in a quarter, which, doesn't typically perform as well as top of the hour, opening the show or closing the show. So yeah, he's really emerged as a very important part of the company. And he's won me over. He was a guy that I did not like on the indies. Although I understood the appeal, it wasn't for me. And I think he has adjusted his act in such a perfect way where that he still has the essence of what got him over, but he's dropped a lot of the super over-the-top stuff that wouldn't have worked in a Major League Wrestling promotion. And he has found the balance to perfection. And all the guy does is go out there and have great matches on TV.
Right. I agree. And really has two types of matches, right? Like he'll have the haha matches, right? You see them opening Dynamite sometimes. He'll have the haha match. He'll do the, the shin kicks and whatnot, and there'll be a lot of nonsense. But then he'll flip around and he'll have one like he had with Wheeler Yuta a couple of weeks ago. You're just like, okay, let's go, So, like you said, it's the balance, it's the diversity. You expect to see something out of Orange Cassidy, then he gives you some of that, but he also delivers something else.
His act was a real kayfabe breaker on the indies. Yeah. But he does it in such a way here where it's not. And that's a really hard thing for him to have adjusted, and he found a way to do it. It's like when he does sort of those, low kicks to the shin or some of these other things, his opponents look at him like he's nuts. They don't sell.
Yeah.
And that's the important part of the act that, on the indies, they might sell those spots and, and everyone's just there to get drunk and have a good time. I get it. But he's really done such a fantastic job making subtle changes to this act for a more, mainstream or major league audience.
I agree. Hey, just before we move on, isn't it wild, right? 3 years ago, we had Eric Bischoff on AEW television. And in the year of our Lord, 2023, that is something that is completely unimaginable at this point.
Well, Eric Bischoff is a giant piss baby who Tony Khan made one negative public comment on, somebody compared AEW to WCW and they framed it in a somewhat negative light. And I don't remember the exact quote, but the gist of it was Tony Khan said, "Hey, look, we're not going to be WCW because I'm not going to make the same mistakes that they made." Okay. That I'm paraphrasing.
Yeah.
And ever since that point, Eric Bischoff, who was once an ally to AEW and Tony Khan, and obviously was booked on multiple Dynamites, completely turned on him, and the claws came out, and now has found a way to, let's just say it. I know it's an overused term, but if the shoe fits, he's found a way to grift as being the anti-AEW guy, and has found a second podcast life. Because listen, there's only 82 weeks. You know what I'm saying? And when you're done talking about all of them, where do you go from there? So the guy needed another, and now he's the anti-AEW guy. And, Eric's completely full of shit. He's one of the most disingenuous people in all of wrestling. And, he got his little feelings hurt when Tony Khan's job is to learn from the past and not repeat the mistakes that other promotions and other bookers and other promoters have made.
Of course.
And
he's deep in wrestling history, as we've mentioned multiple times. You guys on your show, and me on mine. He's a guy who's deep in wrestling history, so he knows this stuff. He knows what not to do. So if he's going out there and saying, "I'm not going to make the same mistakes WCW has made," we know exactly what he's talking about. That's fine.
Yeah, and again, it was a more specific point that I can't recall, but the bottom line is, Bischoff, could have handled that in a more mature way. Maybe had a personal conversation with Tony Khan and said, "Hey, look, don't work so stiff when you're talking publicly," but whatever the case may be. And I could see Bischoff maybe being a little miffed or being caught off guard when he thought all of those things. But again, this has been the Bischoff MO. He's a giant piss baby. He's a grifter. I have almost zero respect for the guy. I mean, it's hard to take him seriously. He changes history. He has this great habit of not recalling things when they cast him in a negative light. And then, he has a terrible memory. He just, I have no use for Bischoff. So to me, it's better that he no longer shows up on this show. Because the less I see or hear of Eric Bischoff, in my view, is the better.
It's, again, this isn't the Eric Bischoff show either, but, it's interesting how this turn of events for him has ended up just exposing him much more for the bad decisions that he's made in pro wrestling over the years. I think a lot of the sheen that accompanied him, being this guy that, we beat WWE for 83 weeks or whatever, that the sheen of the guy that turned WCW around has a lot more, it doesn't have that same luster, right? There's a lot more holes in it now. Personally, I think he only has himself to blame at this point. But
man, it is 83 weeks, isn't it? I blew my own joke before when I was like, there's only 82 weeks to discuss.
Well, what do you talk about? You don't want to talk about the 83rd.
That's true.
Because that's the one where everything went to shit.
Yeah.
Let's move on. MJF. By God. Now, this long... Joe, have you heard that AEW doesn't do long-term storytelling? Have you heard about this?
I've heard this theory, yes.
Yes. Well, hard to imagine, despite the fact that they don't do it, we could pinpoint Jericho's feud with MJF starting in 2020 right into 2021, like mid-year, right? Enemies at first, right? Because their first encounter was in a wrestling ring, and if I'm not mistaken, Jericho won the first match. Then there's the whole thing with MJF joining the Inner Circle, only to stab Jericho in the back. And we got so many things out of this extended feud. The creation of the Pinnacle, which it will always be one of my top 5 moments in AEW. I loved the creation of the Pinnacle that night where they all attacked the Inner Circle. We started off MJF's trope of him putting his opponents through a gauntlet to get to fight him, the blood and guts match, and another Stadium Stampede match on top of that. Is this one a slam dunk?
Well, this was another step in the elevation of MJF to top guy, which ironically enough started with the other guy who allegedly doesn't put anybody over, Cody, where MJF had that association with Cody, which was a weird one because you had Cody the babyface, MJF the heel, but they were pals in kayfabe, which I thought was smart and good because it was something different than what WWE had ever done, right? And I always think it's important for AEW to do things that the established market leader for 2 decades doesn't do to make yourself feel and look different, right? Which is what drives a lot of other people crazy. which could be a topic of a whole nother podcast. But I think it's good when they do things not the way that the market leader does them. That was one of those things. And that obviously led to the MJF Cody feud that we briefly touched on earlier. And then MJF moves into this thing with Jericho. And you could clearly see what Tony Khan's ideas were here to get MJF involved in programs with the top stars in the company and have him come out the other end better for it. Now, at the end of this feud, Chris Jericho wins the blow-off match, correct? Because he wins the match at
All Out.
Yes. But you also have to remember, Chris Jericho was the babyface in this feud. And more often than not, babyfaces, especially top babyfaces, are going to come out ahead in these feuds. And look, here's the thing. We just talked about a bunch of feuds that Jericho very clearly lost. The guy has to win them sometimes. Otherwise, there's no more heat. There's no more value in beating him. You know, you can't lose every feud. And I think sometimes fans get out of control with these things where it's like, you know, sometimes, you know, otherwise, as I said, there's no more value in feuding or beating the guy if he never wins.
Sure.
But when you look at the totality of the MJF feud, I mean, he threw Chris Jericho off the top of a cage. You know, and look, the crash pad and everything was super hokey, and I was not a fan of that. But the idea behind it, you know, stands. And so, you know, the blood and guts match, he did lose. But the thing with MJF is he has this incredible ability and to even when he loses a feud or loses a blow-off match, it doesn't hurt him. We've seen it with Wardlaw. And again, if you want to slap a conspiracy hat on that one, was the whole MJF, you know, plane ticket, I'm going to quit the company, I'm not going to show up for the meet and greet. Was that all 4D chess to kind of take some of the sting off losing in spectacularly squash fashion to Wardlaw later that day, to kind of take the attention away from that? Listen, it's something to think about.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just saying it's something to think about, because none of the talk coming out of that, well, and then obviously other shit happened, but it was getting squashed by Wardlaw.
Sure. That's
right?
Interesting.
So,
yeah, no, okay.
Don't want to take you off on another diversion here, but the point here is, I would say that obviously this was an excellent feud for MJF as part of his climb up the card. Even though he lost the blow-off match, he was the heel. And, you know, and MJF, the essence to him is he has to get his sometimes too.
Well, of course.
Once the odds are even, he needs to lose. That's the whole essence of his character. So in totality, I don't know if this was the slam dunk that most of these other ones have been. I personally think this feud was, I think personally it was great for MJF's career though. If someone wanted to present a counter argument, I would listen and probably disagree.
I'm probably, I think he's absolutely better off, and I think this was excellent for him. And I maybe think it's a little more of a no-brainer because, and for exactly the reason you brought up, in the sense that he ended up not looking worse for wear. He was not broken by this feud by losing the blow-off. And again, if I'm not mistaken...
Hey, I hate to cut you off. You know how we know that? He's the fucking world champion now.
There you go. And his trajectory has only been upward since then. And I remember at the time, me being quite annoyed at this decision at the finish of the match, where I was like, now what? This is weird. Put the new guy over. But, look, I'm going to tell you, this was what, 2020, 2021. You got to give me some leverage here. We're coming out of 2 decades of one company telling you wrestling goes this one way, right? I had to relearn some things in regards to how you book stories and how you book angles and how you build guys, right? You sort of forget at some point that, you can look good in defeat and you can come out looking better after a loss. And that's exactly what happened with MJF, because his rise has never stopped. It was never stunted. And he's probably had one of the longest extended feuds with Chris Jericho in this entire company, this entire list. And he's Like you said, he's the goddamn world champion right now.
Which again, I'd be begging to work with Chris Jericho.
Right.
For all the reasons I laid out earlier, and it probably means that someone views you as a potential top guy. Look, could this feud have contributed to the Vortex theory a little because it went so long? The thing about long feuds, though, is who gives a shit how long a feud is if it's working and it's good?
I agree.
The Okada Tanahashi story spanned like 7 years. Is anyone complaining about it?
They still use it. Like they're doing the dream match thing, right? Just recently, and they're still bringing it up. They're still like,
they're still squeezing every dime they can out of it. Okay. They basically just do their matches, and they did it in Dallas, and now they did it in San Jose. So they know it's a big match for the American audience who sort of grew to love New Japan through that feud and those two guys. But yeah, like you're saying, they're still making money off of it.
Sure.
And that was a 7-year arc. I mean, where they go away from it for a little while, but it was the overriding theme of the company for many years. I don't understand why, you look at Kevin Steen and El Generico in ROH, which was, a super long feud that spanned multiple years. And, you can go on and on. I don't know where we decided that if something is long, it's automatically bad. Can it be long and bad? Yes. But, this idea that, I haven't come across in this exercise yet, and maybe we will, a Jericho feud that both went too long and was also bad. But maybe we're coming up on one.
Well, look, as I was doing research for this, as I was putting the list together, here's one that I completely forgot, right? The Inner Circle versus America's Top Team. Completely. I even forgot that Dan Lambert was a part of this, that was a part of AEW for a while, despite the fact that, week after week, Twitter would lose its mind when he was out there. I completely forgot about this. This is still, this is still babyface Chris Jericho, right? Feuded with Dan Lambert's crew. Now, there were two guys, right, from AEW, Ethan Page and Scorpio Sky, who were included in this feud. But, in the blow-off, Jericho ended up in a multi-man match where there was Andrei Arlovsky, Junior Dos Santos, who was in there, right? But look, for the purposes, I think, here of our discussion, because, obviously the MMA guys were one-shots, and Lambert is gone. And I'm going to tell you, I'm not a fan of the fact that he's not around anymore, because I liked him. I thought he brought something. I thought he brought something that was terribly lacking, and he was the guy that all AEW fans online hate. He was that impersonation of everything that everyone who hates AEW. He just leaned into it. He basically would just go on Twitter, and that's how he'd workshop his promos. He'd just look at what Cornette and the like were saying, and would just put it together. And I thought he was great. No one got more heat than that guy at the time. So I kind of missed
real
him.
Heat.
Yeah.
He would often get more heat than anybody else on the show.
Yeah.
And he's a longtime wrestling fan who knew exactly what he was doing.
He was perfect.
He knew that he looked like a boomer. He knew that people were going to view him as one, and he took all that stuff from the internet, like you said, and crafted it into his character because his goal was to go out there and get heat, and he got it. And people bought it, hook, line, and sinker. He was a heat magnet. And, from what I understand, he told Tony Khan, hey, look, take me off TV because I don't want to overstay my welcome. And, I think he'll be back is my point.
Okay.
I think this was a decision that Lambert made in conjunction with Tony Khan to, I've been on TV a while. My act is going to wear thin. Let people forget about me is kind of the idea here. And look, he's an independently wealthy man from his other ventures, and he doesn't need to do this. He just loves wrestling, and he likes to rile up crowds. But as far as this feud goes,
yes,
this isn't one I'm going to defend because do I think Ethan Page or Scorpio Sky came out the other end better for this or elevated? I don't. I think they both came out at the same level.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll be completely honest. I completely memory wiped Andre Arlovsky and Junior Dos Santos even being in the company at any point until I read the notes that you sent me for the show. I completely memory wiped all of this. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you that this was some productive feud or a stroke of genius on Jericho's part to help get some guys over, because it didn't.
No.
So to me, this one's a miss. So where do you stand on this?
No, I'm completely with you, and thinking about it, and just rereading like some recaps and stuff at the time, I was like, yeah, there was a lot. The feud was really focused on Jericho and Lambert, because let's not forget, in the blow off, Lambert was wrestling. He was in the ring,
yeah,
and so as the the chicken shit manager who's finally gonna he's gonna have to throw down, right? So ultimately, when if the idea here was to maybe try and get some heat on Scorpio Sky and Ethan Page, excuse me, if that was the plan, it failed miserably because everyone was focused on Lambert and Jericho, them trading barbs, and then ultimately wanting to see Lambert get his ass kicked in the ring. So yeah, this was a miss. I don't think either guy is better off after doing this either. I think they're on the same level. They're you could even argue Scorpio. Scorpio Sky's been injured, but he had a middling run-in with the TNT title. Like I don't think he's even close to being better off from that point on.
No, and none of it's memorable. That's the other thing. None of this is memorable, as we demonstrated. You said you forgot about it until you researched, and I forgot any of this existed until I read your research. So it obviously wasn't memorable either. So just a garbage feud. This one didn't work. Look, they're not all winners. That's why we're doing this, to really deep dive it and examine it.
Exactly. Here's another long one. And look, we're going to group a bunch of things together because there's so many moving parts, right? But we're going to talk about Jericho feuding with the remnants of the Inner Circle and Eddie Kingston and the Blackpool Combat Club, because it extends over such a long period of time, which had a lot of crossover between these groups. And this is where I really feel like the generalized notion of the Jericho Vortex began, right? Quick recap: he feuded the Inner Circle. He breaks it apart to create the Jericho Appreciation Society. So he feuds with Santana and Ortiz. Kingston gets involved because he's pals with them. Then all of this spills into the Blackpool Combat Club. Now it's not all bad because we got Anarchy in the Arena out of this. We got Blood and Guts, but then we also got the barbed wire death match with Eddie Kingston. Then we get more matches with Mox for the interim title. We get, a match with Wheeler Yuta for the Ring of Honor World title qualifiers. Pay-per-view match with Danielson. Then there's the semifinal match at the Grand Slam Tournament of Champions. Then he beats Claudio Castagnoli for the ROH title, only to lose it back to Claudio that same year. So again, like there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of people involved. I don't know what you think. I think we can look. We've talked about Mox. I think we don't have to dive into that. I don't think we have to talk about Bryan Danielson being better off. Regardless, Danielson is Danielson. That's that. Even Wheeler Yuta, he was feuding more with Daniel Garcia than anything else. But maybe Santana, Ortiz, Kingston, Claudio. Maybe these are more relevant to our discussion here.
Yeah, I agree. Danielson obviously, is just two top guys, and Danielson went on to a money drawing main event program with MJF, and they had one of the greatest matches that you'll ever see. So hard to argue he came out of the other end of Jericho worse off. It's Bryan Danielson. So no real reason to waste a lot of time on that. I do agree that this whole era is really where the Jericho Vortex stuff really began, because this did eat up a lot of time. And the big key here was Kingston, who I think very clearly is the best example of someone who came out the other end with Jericho worse for it, and worse off. Because the big blow-off match was the barbed wire match, and that match sucked. And neither guy was good in the match. They were both bad. The match wasn't good. And it didn't do anything for Kingston. And at the end of the day, Kingston wasn't elevated by his feud with Chris Jericho, and he didn't come out any better for it. And really all he got out of it, all Kingston got out of any of this was the great visual of coming out with the gas can and threatening to kill everybody. Like that will be embedded in people's minds for the rest of time. But it is impossible to argue that Eddie Kingston benefited from his feud with Chris Jericho. And therein lies what I think is the crux of all of this, okay? Because Eddie Kingston is very, very popular among a certain sect of online fans, and they are annoyed that he came out of this feud probably worse off than he came in with Chris Jericho. But I do think you have to put a lot of that responsibility on Eddie Kingston. I mean, he was just as responsible for that shitty barbed wire match as Jericho was. Okay. And all the while, he's getting into backstage fights every 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And hurting his stock in the company through some stuff that he admits he was wrong for, and that his temper got the better, the slap fight with Sammy Guevara, and, that bled actually into being on screen to some degree. And, that's on Eddie. That stuff is on Eddie. And I might be more sympathetic to the idea that Chris Jericho derailed Eddie Kingston's career if Chris Jericho had a longer history of doing so. But we've just gone through it. There's no evidence of it. In fact, he helped just about everybody that he worked with.
Yeah.
To this point. And so I find it hard, but again, fans are fans. It's short for fanatic. They're passionate and they're mad that Eddie Kingston came out the other end of this worse off and then disappearing from TV. And it looks like they're trying to rehab him to some extent, chasing the ROH title, which is fine. But I think the length of all of this mess with the Blackpool Combat Club and Kingston, Santana, Ortiz, the ROH title run, it all feels like one big blob. And it did take up a lot of time. And Kingston did come out worse for it. So this, I think, you're correct. This is truly where the Jericho Vortex takes hold in a lot of people's narratives. And and Kingston obviously was a big loser with all of this. Now, Castagnoli, I mean, Jericho wins the title, then loses it back to him. And in the process, he taps out to the giant swing and helps Claudio get a new finish over. No one had ever tapped out to that move. That move had never beaten anybody. Chris Jericho tapped out to that move and put the guy over clean in the middle on an ROH pay-per-view. So I'm not giving people that one.
No,
okay?
You can't.
Do I think Claudio comes out of that better? No, but he's on the same level he always was. Jericho didn't hurt him. This was a feud between two top guys, and the babyface went over in the end. It's just classic pro wrestling.
Yeah, and I mean the story is just like it's as old as time, right? It's like the guy who should not be ROH champion, right? The guy who is the complete antithesis of the work rate legendary ROH World Championship, right?
The sports entertainer.
Exactly. Yeah. He should not be holding this title. And he not only does he hold it for a couple of months, but he's beating former champions at the same time. He's going through the list of former ROH guys. Did the story get over like crazy? Probably not, but it was a very easy story to get into because Claudio then had to don the persona of being the hero, right? Of being the guy who's going to restore honor, right, to the title, pun intended. So, I'll even say this. I'll even tell you, I think Claudio out of this, even if I think his trajectory has been upward, maybe not like a huge spike, but I think it's been upwards because right now, especially what they're doing with him on, look, he's still on AEW TV. He's still on Dynamite every week. He's in, the most significant faction that they have. He's in the midst of a heel turn. They're probably, setting up something big with the Elite very, very soon. So this is all good. Plus, on ROH TV right now, he's clearly the final boss. Like, he's really in a position. He's in a position right now, if we want to go back to his era as Cesaro, that WWE never even dared to put him in. Unless he was with Sheamus in a tag team. Let's put that as a caveat. So, again, it might not be the, a spike upward trajectory, but I would argue that he's better off. I think he's on another, maybe not on a completely different lane, but he's higher up there. And I think, I think he still has that aura, that mystique that still follows him, where, fans online were always saying, how is WWE not using this guy? How is he not a champion? So on and so forth. TK still leaning into that, and Claudio is gobbling all up. And I think, that's still something that's carrying to this day. And the fact that he defeated Chris Jericho, you couldn't get more symbolic than Chris Jericho, the sports entertainer, the evil WWE guy to a degree, right? The embodiment of everything that we hate about WWE, being beaten by Claudio, who was kept down by that company for years. Like, to me, the symbolism is ridiculous. It's, it's there. And I think it makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, it was Danielson who really was getting beat like a drum by Jericho during all of this, not Claudio. And Claudio, they told the story the right way in the end. And Jericho was willing to make a fool of himself, tapping out to the giant swing.
Exactly.
In the process, which the heel should do at the end, especially that kind of heel.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just to circle back on Kingston, look, I agree with you. And I'm convinced that there are many booking decisions, Joe, that most of us are, a lot of decisions that are made in regards to booking are for reasons that we are not privy to, and that is okay. I myself am, I love Eddie Kingston. I'm a huge fan. I think his persona is refreshing in the sense that he is, there in a business of liars, his level of sincerity that he brings to pro wrestling is unique, right? The way he presents himself and the way how he cuts his promos, everything feels real with him, feels sincere. So, I'm the kind of guy, I will, go up to the barricades and be like, why doesn't Eddie Kingston why doesn't he get a world title program? I'll be one of those guys, to be perfectly honest. But I'm also not, completely blind. And I understand, I think it's easy to put one and one together to see what happened with Kingston here. And the fact that there was no follow-up, because they could have redone this. They could have had another match. They could have tried to do something to wash away the skeeve of the barbed wire match, right? But they didn't. And I think that's probably related to decisions backstage that maybe don't make sense from a TV point of view, but maybe backstage there were reasons behind this. We're like, no, we just got to drop this because this isn't working even on a professional level, on a behind the scenes level. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. At the end of the day, still though, you can't say what was presented to fans was of any benefit to Eddie Kingston.
No, I agree. No, I agree with you.
No.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, but because I still wonder, and maybe we'll wrap it up on this one and we'll move on to the next feud. But I still wonder why. Well, wonder why is not exactly, but I think it's interesting that they didn't try to revisit this. That they didn't try to give like I said, just shower off the distaste of the barbed wire match. Let's try another match in another circumstance and maybe do better so that people will forget like that, so that your final impression of this feud is not the barbed wire match.
Yeah, maybe they will. It doesn't seem like they're going to, but
no, I don't think so either. Like I said, I think there's things that we're just not privy to that are just gonna block this for a while.
Yeah, and this ultimately just didn't work, and it was in terms of people creating narratives and things like that, it was the wrong guy to have something not work with, because it's a guy that everybody wants to see succeed and do well, and it derailed him. There's no getting around it. It derailed him.
Let's wrap it up. Ricky Starks is the most recent one, of course, 2023. Started with a surprise clean win by Starks in January. Then Starks gets put through the ringer by the Jericho Appreciation Society, tag team matches, the gauntlet, the promos, of course. And then Starks beats Jericho again, clean as fresh laundry at Revolution 2023, excuse me. Again, and Jericho does not have a singles win over Ricky Starks at this point. I'm gonna hand it right over to you. What do you think about Chris Jericho and Ricky Starks?
There is quite literally nothing else Chris Jericho could have done for this man short of allowing Ricky Starks to literally murder him on television to put him over stronger than he did in this feud. What more could you possibly want? Starks wins both singles matches, okay? Overcomes tons of Jericho cheating and interference to do so both times. Gets hit in the head with the bat and still beats him the first time. Beats him the second time on the pay-per-view in front of a raucous crowd that was going insane for the match, which also puts to bed the idea that the booking of the feud didn't work either, because it sure was over in the building when they did the blow-off, okay? Mm-hmm. Not only did Ricky Starks beat Chris Jericho both times he faced him in singles matches, he beat everybody in the fucking unit. He beat the entire Jericho Appreciation. Any person he wrestled in the Jericho Appreciation Society, he beat. The only one he didn't beat was Sammy Guevara, because he didn't wrestle him. He beat Hagar. He beat Garcia. He beat Menard. He beat whatever the other guy's name is.
Angelo.
Parker.
Yeah.
He beat them all. And he beat Jericho twice. I mean, anyone who argues against this one needs their head checked. I mean, there's just no fathomable argument against this one. Again, and this is another example, like Orange Cassidy, where Jericho handpicked somebody and said, I want to put that guy over and do everything I can to get that guy over. And that's not just me spilling beans. That's on record now. Tony Khan said that in one of the press, I guess the one after the last pay-per-view. Yep. I mean, that's on record now. That's not I'm not giving away some industry secret. Chris Jericho seeked this out and wanted to do this and wanted to feud with Ricky Starks. And oh, by the way, not only did he put Ricky Starks over as strong as you could put over somebody, again, without having them murder you, okay? He lost to Action Andretti and elevated that guy from television jobber and instantly got him over as a somebody.
Yeah.
And the frustrating discourse around that one is that people will then say, oh, well, what's Action Andretti doing now? He's working on Dark. Totally. He doesn't have any more momentum. Well, first of all, this idea, okay, that every time somebody wins a match, that now they got to be pushed to the moon and win the world title, or we're not taking advantage of the is utter nonsense.
Well, you know why. You know why, though. Because this is 2 decades of wrestling being done one way. Like if you don't win a match and then you don't immediately win the world title, you're going back to catering, right?
Yeah, that's right. We've squandered it. Yeah,
yes.
But it's like Action Andretti was a literal jobber.
Yep.
Before he beat Chris Jericho. That wasn't going to catapult. I mean, you could. I mean, I'm not saying you can't rocket pack somebody. You can. That's one way to do things. Does anybody think Action Andretti is ready for that kind of push?
No.
Honestly, of course not.
No.
Okay. But you can't sit here and tell me that beating Jericho didn't do anything for the guy. He's not a jobber anymore. They picked a guy that they liked, they signed him, and they found a creative way to get him over with the audience.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what that was. And Chris Jericho does not have to do that. Chris Jericho can say to Tony Khan, that doesn't work for me, brother. I'm Chris Jericho. I'm not losing to a jobber on TV. Find somebody else. But Chris Jericho does it, which again runs counter to this idea that he's eating people up and is always looking out for himself. What did he get out of losing to Action Andretti? Nothing. But he knows it's not going to hurt him because he's Chris Jericho.
Exactly.
And that's what a leader and a star who's a leader does. Mm-hmm. They help put people over. And then he just gets beat like a drum by Ricky Starks every time the odds are even close to even. You can't do anything more here. The only possible counter you could have to this is now people may say, all right, well, on the other end, Ricky Starks is now feuding with Juice Robinson, who's never won a match on TV and isn't a guy who's pushed. But again, and we don't know how that feud's going to play out. Maybe Ricky Starks beats him on Dynamite and they never speak of it again. I don't know how it's going to, even if that's a bad feud, right? How is that Chris Jericho's fault?
Right.
And what we're discussing here is Chris Jericho is people being worse off after working with Chris Jericho because of Chris Jericho. How would that be Chris Jericho's fault? He did his job. If Tony Khan now drops the ball on Ricky Starks, that's not on Chris Jericho.
Exactly.
What more could Chris Jericho have done?
Mm-hmm.
He lost to the guy twice. He lost to him in the blow-off. Clean as a sheet. Put the guy over. Great match, by the way.
Yep.
Crowd went nuts for it. It's not Chris Jericho's problem or fault if Tony Khan books the guy poorly coming out of it. So it's nonsense. A lot of this is just nonsense. And people trying to make these things fit what they want to be true.
You know, in the months leading up to his program with MJF, right? You know, with when he was around when he was feuding with Hobbs and all of that, I had people in my Discord, which I love, and I love the people in my Discord, right? And they were like, every week, where's Ricky Starks? Where's Ricky Starks? Where is he? Why isn't Ricky Starks on TV more? Well, he's, they had him on the announce table. Yeah, but I mean in the ring. He's always on, he's being promoted. He's being put on TV, promoted in the pure sense of the world, right? It's like it's like being put out there. Well, why isn't he wrestling? Why isn't he on TV? Where is he now? And then he ends up in a promo with Chris Jericho. I have these people going, oh no, not a program with Chris Jericho, but he's on TV every week.
Yeah.
He's on television the main complaint they had. It's like the guy gets no exposure. And then he ends up with Chris Jericho. Like you said, every week on television. And Joe, it's not even like he ends up on television with Chris Jericho and they do a little promo or thing. He's nailing it. He gets in the ring. He cuts a promo face to face with Chris Jericho. Not only is he hanging with him, he's outshining him in some circumstances.
Yeah.
He's phenomenal the whole way through. Now, like you said, whatever happens moving forward with Juice Robinson or the Bullet Club, whatever they're going to do with this moving forward, that's out of Jericho's control. Because at this point, if people were worried after the MJF match as to what was going to happen with Ricky Starks, when they entered the program with Chris Jericho, I immediately was like, he's good. He's fine. He's safe. He's going to be safe for years at this point regarding AEW at the very least, right? He's going to be treated as a top guy because clearly Tony wants to take care of him. He wants to give him that slow build that MJF got over like the 2 first years of his tenure in AEW. Wasn't like, wasn't tearing it down every week. Wasn't like, but slowly, surely wrestling with top guys, making sure that people understand that his lane is above many others, that his ceiling is world championship material. He's going to get there. This is inevitable at this point. And the feud with Jericho only accentuated his strengths, Joe. His charisma, his promo, his in-ring work, his capacity to tell stories both with a microphone and inside the ring. What's wrong? I don't get it.
This one's really hard to argue. Really, really hard. I mean, this is one of the biggest slam dunks on the board.
Yeah.
And there were still people, even after Starks won the pay-per-view match, trying to twist themselves into a pretzel and convince themselves that this was bad for Ricky Starks. And it's like, I don't, you know, I don't get it. I mean, it's obviously almost the complete opposite with Chris Jericho. He's honestly one of the more selfless major stars in pro wrestling. I mean, when you really look at the evidence, like we just did for the last hour and a half, the guy almost always puts his best foot forward in trying to get the person over or elevate the person he's working with. And I think there's some clear-cut cases of misses, like with Eddie Kingston.
Yep.
But there's far more undeniable slam dunk examples of Chris Jericho helping to get people over, whether it's the obvious ones like Ricky Starks or Orange Cassidy, you know, the MJF feud, which was a major step in his elevation. I would classify the Hangman Page thing similar to MJF, and even the shorter term things that we talked about earlier, like the Jungle Boy 10-minute challenge and things like that, where he's always seeking to help get people over and usually succeeds. And I don't think Jericho bats 1,000. Nobody does. But, you know, for the most part, when he's a heel, he almost always loses the blow off. And when he's the babyface, he almost always wins it. But that's pro wrestling.
Exactly.
And in those cases, like with MJF, it all, and you know, and like with Hangman Page, it was the right decision. And with MJF, it was the next step in MJF's elevation. And I think a lot of it, this Vortex stuff, is the Kingston thing, which annoys a lot of people. And let's be completely honest, it's the man's politics. It's his politics that people don't like.
Yeah.
And listen, that's fine. And you know, listen, if you're a wrestling fan, you can dislike anybody for any reason. You're a fan, you do what you want. But we can't deny it plays a part. His politics, his wife's politics, you know, he donated to Trump and all that. And a lot of people don't like that. And they let that bleed into their criticism, which if you're a fan is fine. Fans, as I said, can do whatever you want. If you're an analyst, if you're getting paid to cover pro wrestling, if you're getting paid to analyze pro wrestling, I am of the belief you have to leave all that kind of stuff out of it. You know, when I approach my job, and this is my job, I can't be worried about who people are voting for. I can't be worried about where people stand on certain political issues or social issues or anything like that. I have to focus on what's happening on the screen. As an analyst, that's all that matters to me. But I do think that a lot of that comes into play when it comes to fans and even some pundits and analysts where they allow their personal feelings for Chris Jericho, the person, bleed into their analysis of what he's doing on screen. I think that's unfair. I think you can criticize Chris Jericho until you're fucking out of breath on Chris Jericho, the person, or who Chris Jericho has on his podcast. Go ahead. But that has, and you can bury him all day long if you want. I don't have any problem with that. I would never tell anybody not to do that. But it has nothing to do with his on-screen performance in this company. To me, those are two different things that should be analyzed and criticized separately. So if you're looking at this fairly the way that we just have, I think it's very hard to argue that the Jericho Vortex is real. And I think that the Eddie Kingston feud and how people feel about Chris Jericho, the person, are really what has precipitated a lot of this.
I think that that is a perfect summation of the exercise we just did here. I don't have much to add on that one because I'm in complete agreement. I think it's the perception of what Chris Jericho does as a wrestling star in AEW is muddled by personal feelings and so on and so forth. But when you take it, you know, you just look at the facts of what's happening in the promotion step by step. I'm with you. I can't really see any tangible proof that Chris Jericho is a detriment to everyone he feuds with.
There's certainly no pattern of behavior where he's eating guys up and being manipulative, and it doesn't exist.
No, it really doesn't. And considering, like you said, that he's Chris Jericho, that he has an illustrious career, he could be that doesn't work for me brothering all the time,
and get away with it.
And
he doesn't.
Yeah, he doesn't. Well, Joe, I'm going to wrap it up on that. Thank you, honestly, sincerely, thank you very much for joining me today. This was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it, and it brought up the discussion that I hoped it would, because I think it was a fun subject, and I knew we had similar feelings on it. And I'm just glad that we did it. Thank you so much for being on.
Hey, it was my pleasure. Anytime.
And for the rest of you, well, thank you very much for listening to the podcast today. Appreciate it a great deal. If you're watching this on YouTube, youtube.com/MrWarrenHayes, of course, consider leaving a like and subscribing. That stuff helps out a great deal. And if you're listening to this on your favorite podcast app, well, reviews, ratings, all of that, of course, helps out a great deal. Otherwise, I will be back soon. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next time.